Would like to welcome all of our listeners today to another episode of the Healthcare Leadership Excellence Podcast. We have a great guest. We always do. This is no exception today. I love it when someone is enthused about what they do, knows their stuff, leads well, and is happy about their life and where they're heading. It's just as we speak with our guest today, you'll see exactly what I'm saying. I had a great pre-interview with him, and we've got some good background to dig into, and so I would like to welcome James Dismond out of Hilton Head and the president, CEO of Mirasol Health. James, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here today.
So tell us a bit about the background, what brings you to us today, a little about Mirasol.
Yeah, absolutely. My background is nonprofit management. My entire career, I've been blessed with that field, and I have a degree in healthcare administration and a Kentucky boy at heart, but have the privilege of the home base being here in Hilton Head Island, which is just beautiful. And no other better place to have a corporate office, right?
I guess.
Um, And Mirasol Health is a nonprofit community-based healthcare organization that is grassroots, boots on the ground, providing patient services primarily inside the home in the spaces of end-of-life care, palliative care, which is chronic symptom management, and now recently the behavioral health space. And so I get the fortunate ability to lead this organization every single day.
And just for the record, I don't mean to pick on anything here. We're talking to somebody who has really jumped into corporate leadership at, for a CEO, a relatively young age. And so I'd like to just jump into our questions on that, because a lot of our listeners today are younger leaders. And I hear all the time, James, of Carl, some of the people that report to me are as old as my mom and dad. How do I how do I navigate that? Because they're kind of looking at me as if, who did you know, or what how did you get to be my leader? As we jump in, any guidance there?
Yeah, it can be a kind of a slippery road because in our organization we have 5 generations in our workforce. All the way from the youngest being around 22 years old to our eldest employee being around, 80, 81 years old. Plus, when you wrap in our volunteer base, we have a volunteer that's 97 years old. So when you come in as a young leader, not only young in my career, but also just young in age, I really would encourage people to explore how to speak to a multi-generational audience. And the number one thing that I could tell anyone is really vamp up on your listening skills so you can hear what people are trying to tell you. And it might not necessarily be the words coming out of their mouth, it could be their verbal language. And when, I can't just prepare a statement and go deliver it to the organization, I have to be very thoughtful and intentional about how I'm creating the dialogue. And sometimes it's creating that message in a multi-generational facet of this is going to go to this audience, this way is going to go to this audience, and meeting them where they are so that the message comes across uniformly but gets to the generation that it needs to get to.
So unfortunately, many times, because we hear the words listening skills and we hear multi-generational, and people hear it and say, yeah, okay, I know that, good. And of course, they don't know either one of them really well because they listen because that's what their ears still do, but they don't realize the difference between hearing and listening. So, as one who has really dug in that regard, could you give us some further counsel on what it means to truly listen? And sometimes when I ask that question, people kind of roll their eyes. Carl, is kind of obvious, but boy, I'm finding it is not. And then we hear so much about from boomers to Gen Z, and I just am blown away from 22 to 97 if you include your volunteer base. What have you done to bring yourself up on skills of those five distinct areas?
I definitely am in agreement with you that typically individuals think they're a good listener, and they're probably not a good listener, especially if they tell you they're a good listener, right? It's usually my first indication that we probably have some training to do. I think one of the very most important things about listening is internal. And if someone is talking and you're already thinking about how you're going to respond, you're not actively listening to what they're saying. You're already preparing what you're going to rebut or recant or get your point of view in there. And to truly listen to someone is taking pause, setting, paying attention to what they're saying, restating what they just stated to you to make sure that you understand for clarity, and then moving forward after that. And as a young leader, that has been so important to just my leadership and just understanding what people were trying to deliver to me. That's one area that's multi-generational that if you use active listening, it's going to be beneficial in every conversation that you have. I think also listening is very important, but you have to have the right environment in order to listen. Where you're having conversations is very, very important, and how you're having the conversation is very important. If someone is very upset and they're trying to relay information to you and you're in your company hallway, probably not the best place to have that conversation. So having respect to say, how about we step inside my office or we step in this private area and we have this conversation, but also realizing that it's very important to it's okay to say, this isn't the appropriate place for this conversation. So I'm going to get back to you for us to have it. And redirecting people when necessary. When speaking on the multi-generational aspect and some of the areas that have helped me really understanding the generations, I found with my staff that some individuals don't even understand where the new generation comes in and the old generation kind of goes out. Like, am I a millennial? Am I not a millennial? And how is that important? And then you have some individuals who fall in that, they're a late boomer, so they're kind of veering in the other generation, which is why characteristics are super important. Um, I think I've just really delved into understanding those generations and the workforce in general. The way that millennials interact in the office space is very different from a boomer, and getting them to interact can be somewhat difficult. So there's so many communication assessments like the Colby assessment and personality assessments that you can use for your team to train them on how to interact with each other, because it's not necessarily just me as a leader interacting with them. It's more important that they know how to interact together for efficiency and success.
Excellent. I want to jump back to Mirasol for a couple of minutes. I'm still shaking my head at the explosive growth that you've had to navigate. And so tell us a bit about that growth and how you as a leader have managed this almost exponential. We were here yet last week or last year, and now we're here. Give us some numbers and give us how you've handled that.
We've been very fortunate as an organization to experience some natural growth and then some strategic growth, and that is something I think most organizations are striving for as a goal. But there is, when we say exponential growth, the numbers I'm about to share, it truly showcases that. One number that I'm very proud of is that we used to serve around 40 to 41 patients per day. And within 18 months of us starting this journey as a new CEO, and I had a new senior leadership team, we went to upwards of over 200 to 220 patients per day. And for a healthcare organization, that is not only unheard of in some domains, but also really can be really, really tough. And we were not buying market share. We didn't merge with anyone. We didn't acquire any other businesses. That was growth within our own business segment. And that comes with its own natural challenges as well. But it's been really beneficial because we really focused internally on our internal processes, really investing in our culture and our talent and our efficient processes to help grow the business. And it's proven to have a great return on investment just from the community choosing to elect for Mirasol Health as their provider.
People love growth, obviously, but they don't like the change that occurs with that growth. So, how have you helped frontline employees that don't have the master's degree who just growth is sometimes frightening? How do you help them adapt to the changes that a 5-time multiple in growth causes?
Great question. I might say some statements that might offend some people, just as a disclaimer in this. I love change. I like to think of myself as a change maker, like I embrace it, and I find it very exciting and exhilarating. When we talk about change and the aspect of Marisol Health, and you mentioned, how do you get that field worker, the frontline staff to embrace change? And I'm going to talk about the process a little bit. I find it easier to get the change for the field staff and the frontline workers than sometimes that person that has a doctorate or master's degree. And that's been interesting for me because I used to think about it the opposite way. But one of the main ways that we helped kind of bring in change to our organization was just being transparent and being honest. Here's our strategic direction. This is where we're headed. This is why we're headed this way. And we're ready for some public comment from our staff and this team to provide us with feedback. And we may pivot that direction based off your feedback, but this is where we're headed at this time. I don't think it's necessarily change that is the issue for the team. I think it's the uncertainty of how it's going to affect them. And so if you can take that uncertainty and put some pavement and foundation to it, and then bring in the most important aspect of it, which is the why we are doing this, how is this going to help? That's a strategy that will move you forward in the change making process.
Switching lanes here a bit. In our pre-call, you talked about the courage to step back. And I that resonated at the time, and I'd love our listeners to dig in with you on what that means as an individual and as a leader.
Absolutely. It was also one of the hardest lessons I think I've learned in this journey. As someone who likes change and likes to create new things, I'm naturally a doer and a fixer, which means I want to be in the trenches. I want to be in the day to day. I want to be checking in with the staff. And that can really turn into a negative very quickly. You want to be checking in. You want to be checking in on someone, not checking up to make sure that they're following through, right? Um,
Okay. I,
oh,
I've got to jump in here because that's too important a point.
okay.
Checking in versus checking up. Explain that for us. Sorry to interrupt. This is so important.
No, I love that. To us, we want to check in with you. We want to see where you are. How's it going? How can I provide more resources for you to achieve your goals? Whereas when you're checking up on someone, it's more micromanagement. You know, what are you doing? How are you doing it? How does this fit our policies? And you're micromanaging them. And the checking up or the checking in to me is like a pulse check. You know, is your team member okay? Are they carrying their workload okay? Do they need any assistance from you as a team member or as a leader to make sure they have the resources they need? Oftentimes we call it a check-in, but really we're just wanting to know where they're at towards their goal and are we going to meet our goal and we're going to move on with our day. We're not actually checking in on the person. We're checking up on the metrics.
Oh, so listeners, if you're at a place where you can just scroll back a bit on this recording, what you just heard in the last 3 minutes is gold, checking in versus checking up. So I completely interrupted your thought train on the courage to step back. Sorry about that.
No, it's important, and just to highlight a little bit, that came to our senior leadership team because we had been checked up on so much in our career, but not checked in with. And ultimately, many of us changed positions because of that. So that's going to lead into the overall conversation too. You're going to have to refresh me on where I was in my thought process there.
Basically, we're just starting in on the courage to step back, the ability to look at things, and that's when the stepping
Mhm.
back, you use the phrase check in, check up, and that's where I butted in.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So stepping back in the check-in process can be a part of stepping back, right? As doers and fixers, which is, that's more me, I can overstep really, really, really quickly if I don't take the time to step back and really look at strategy and where we are strategically as an organization. By taking a pause and stepping back and analyzing all that's going on around you in the organization, you have a moment where you can say, here's where guidance is needed. Here's where resources are needed. And you can start pivoting and putting your time in those buckets. I divide things in buckets. That's how my brain processes. Whereas if you are in the trenches with your team, which sometimes may be necessary, but if you're in the trenches, you're missing some of those most important things and not seeing where those team members are, not even seeing where your competition is, of where you may need to pivot or where an opportunity could be. One of the most important things that top level executives, I think, need is that pause moment to step back, reflect, and make sure they're guiding the organization to where it needs to go.
So, speaking about taking the organization where it needs to go, so many times as I work with organizations, I hear the phrase, and it's turned into a buzzword, transformation, kind of transforming. And what are the challenges you've had from 40 to 200, 200 plus per day? That's whether you ask for it or not, that's going to cause a transformation. Speak to us about that, about what has to happen and what transformation is and isn't.
It's so important that we're going into the transformation conversation because the phrase I use often, and that's, we didn't grow for growth's sake. It was intentional growth, and with that growth, we knew that this transformation was going to happen, and we wanted that intentionally to happen. We wanted this organization to transform in something greater and something better with a strategic vision and strategic direction. What you don't want is a transformation that you did not have any intention of, and it's kind of just happening without any control, because then you don't know where that's going to land. To us at Mirasol Health, the transformation of going from 40 patients to upwards of 200, we needed to intentionally transform the organization into more of a thought leadership, mission driven, all on the same path organization. And with that, one of the main things that we did was we became completely transparent with our staff. I
Meaning,
never Yeah, I'd never worked with an organization that had shared an open book of finances where we walked the entire staff through the finances, the bottom line. And when we did this, I asked our staff in an open session, how much of $1 do you think we keep? And how much of that dollar do you think we put in investments and it kind of just sets and grows somewhere? And we got 40 cents, 50 cents, 70 cents, 80 cents. And I was sitting there shaking my head, and I'm like, for us as a nonprofit in the hospice and palliative space, if we can keep 3 pennies of that dollar, we're doing amazing.
and what was the staff's reaction?
It was like a wow. And it led into a larger conversation of, how do we survive off 3 pennies? Right? And I was able to take that into a very transformative dialogue of, when we don't do things operationally efficient, when we make mistakes because of oversight or just, going through a busy day of ordering the wrong supply, or a patient transfers from our service to somewhere else, we don't keep those 3 pennies. We lose money. And then I quantified that and described how many patients and other things we must do to make up for those 3 pennies. It starts to really resonate with that field worker or the administrative person of, wow, we all have to work together and get this right the first time before we can even have the opportunity to keep those 3 pennies. And then the transformation part is that mission moment of, we can't do greater impact or have greater impact without those 3 pennies.
Powerful story. When we spoke about transformation on the pre-call, you had a phrase, 2 words that immediately were written down because these 2 words don't generally join each other in a sentence. Compassionate accountability. Tell us more on that.
This is a phrase that is very common throughout our organization, and I'm so thankful for it because compassion and accountability is what keeps me grounded every single day. As an executive, we're leading people, whether you have a management style or more of a true leadership type direction, and we have to make some really hard decisions. And a team, we've all heard this saying, you're only as good as your least performing asset on your team.
Mhm.
And culture is so important to a team's success. And we were trying to figure out, as a young leader, but I had a completely new senior leadership team because of some turnover, which I'd like to talk about later. We had 68% turnover in my first 3 months. Is how do we hold people accountable but still drive culture to be positive? And I heard some CEOs speaking with some large social media companies, and I heard the CEO say, compassion and accountability. And he went in to say that the best thing you can do for someone is hold them accountable and be truthful to them. And it could be the best decision you ever do to them. And that sometimes that means letting them go from your company and giving them an opportunity somewhere else.
Mhm.
And so we hold people compassionately accountable to the standards of this organization, to the standards of care that's set by regulation, and to our mission and our vision. And when someone's not performing, we have a conversation with them, and I start with the words, I want to let you know this is a compassion and accountability conversation. It may be really rough at moments, but it's going to make us better if we commit to this. And when you set that dialogue, it becomes a really professional conversation. It's when someone's underperforming and you let them underperform that you do damage because of your lack of leadership with that person.
And again, to our listeners, that last sentence, you do damage to that person. So many times we make the mistake of holding back on tough conversations. And if what I'm hearing from you, James, you just can't do that.
You absolutely can. And you might not get the immediate tangibility, especially if you're exiting someone from your organization. We exited someone in my first 90 days, and it just was not a good alignment. And that person wasn't necessarily in agreement with me at the time, but the numbers spoke for themselves. The way this person felt at work spoke for itself. But, change and closure can be difficult. I just spoke with this lady literally about 2 months ago, and she's in a new position. She's thriving. It's in a different sector of healthcare. And when I was exiting, I said, it was really great to see you. And she said, I just want to say thank you for letting me go.
Wow, that's a testament. So you mentioned you let somebody go in your first 90 days. It sounds like a lot of people left in the first 90 days. 68% turnover?
Yes.
So walk us through how that was being a new CEO, a young CEO, and having 2/3 of your team leave.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that when you're going through change, and this company had done a feasibility study, so we knew what was ahead of us if we didn't change. So we had to make some very quick decisions and then deliver them to the staff. The CEO, the top level leadership, was a big change to the organization just in itself. It had been led by the same person for 17 years who done, a tremendous job for the resources that they had. So my first staff meeting, I'm delivering the feasibility study that essentially stated we'd be closed in 5 years if we kept doing what we had been doing this past 40 years. And talked about the why and how we could serve patients better, and that it was our duty to serve patients better, and that this was the direction, and that compassion and accountability was coming for every single person. We were going to reevaluate every single position in the organization to make sure that we were all on the same page. It wasn't days after that resignation started coming in. And at first, that hit me really personally as a new leader. Like, what am I doing? Am I right for this position? I mean, the imposter syndrome was hitting me hard during those first few weeks to months, but it was the best thing that could have ever happened to us. That 68% turnover permitted me to recruit some top talent, bring in new eyes, really steadfastly move towards compassion and accountability. And I don't find that it's a coincidence that we had a whole new senior leadership team with a few months after that, and that growth started happening. When you align talent, passion, mission with the right people in your organization in the right places, it's going to succeed.
And along that line, you talked about that each person has a professional development plan. How's that work? But that's a huge commitment. And I think many of the people are in organizations where the professional development plan is the annual evaluation that's done in a hurry, discussed even in a more hurried manner, and is then gathers dust until the next first quarter of the year. And it's useless. So what have you done to use this professional development plan?
Well, we're very big on adding value, not only to the people that are on our team, but also just in every aspect of our business. Like, I always like to ask myself, how is this adding value? So when you're doing an annual evaluation to check a compliance box, that's not value, that's a task. And these are things that were originally instilled in companies for value. And so we were looking for a way that we could show investment into our staff, into our team members, but also have a way to manage professional development outside of an annual evaluation. So we were talking with one of our resources, and they're like, "Have you ever tried professional development plans and really using a 70-20-10 rule, and 70% hands-on training in your company, training them for skill sets that are going to be valuable to the organization, 20% using something outside of the organization that's going to gain to their acumen that will help them personally, and then 10% institutional educational resources that will gain more academia." And so we started structuring these plans slowly. We started with our senior leaders and then kind of trickled down. And the outcomes blew me out of the water, because one of the best facts about this is that you help create the plan, but you don't drive the plan. The person does. It's it's they're accountable to that professional plan, and they can do it, or they don't have to do it at all. Or it can be something that's more time, it's more lengthy. But you're gonna know off the bat who's eager, who wants to grow, and who's devoted to their professional development, which are usually going to be your top performers. And so I've seen people react to this so positively, and I mean, they go after it and they really grow with the company really, really quickly. And I've seen some people who kind of like, "Oh, this is great, I'm going to do this part." But usually that professional development plan and the annual evaluation go hand in hand now, and it has been a huge tool for us to drive culture, but also just to invest in people and grow leaders for our organization.
One, you've mentioned several times the word culture. And just a quick story that I want you to tie into. I'm at an organization the other day and I'm talking to one of their surgeon leaders. And he looks at me and says, Carl, I'm just so sick of this culture. And he used a couple of words that I won't just let it be said that I'm sick of this culture. This whole emphasis, why don't we just all do our jobs?
Mm.
Well, obviously, I've got a little more work to do with this individual. When someone kind of rolls their eyes on the culture piece and come on, how do you respond to that? Because obviously, for Mirasol to do what they do, to have this culture of development, like you said in the pre-call, creating great people. How do you lead culture at your level, and how do you expect those leaders underneath you to lead culture?
Great question. And I've seen this, I've experienced it. And my first question to that individual would be, could you define what culture really is in your understanding? Because clearly there's a disconnect, right? And then I would ask them to explain their culture and their organization, and then encourage them to go talk to 10 to 15 other people in that organization to see if they get the same thing, because they're probably not going to. For us, culture is the number one responsibility on my list, because culture trickles down to every single thing else that's on my performance plan from the board of directors, because we're a nonprofit, but also it's going to tie into every single metric that we have in this organization. And having worked in this organization before I became the CEO, I had a good understanding of how I felt as an employee and how I felt the culture was. But I'd also worked for some organizations that had great cultures and some that didn't. And so we're in a world where we don't really like to talk about feelings, or we're taught not to talk about feelings at work, but how someone feels when they're at work is going to be the trajectory of where they're at. And there's a saying that in the first 2 weeks of hiring an employee is going to tell you how long they're going to be with their company. And so that first 2 weeks is really important, because they're getting a feel of the culture, the training, the onboarding, all these very important foundational things. And so for me, how I help really guide culture is setting the foundation and the expectation. And so you have to embody the culture in your organization. And, the old saying, you got to walk the walk and talk the talk, or it's not going to resonate with anyone. And there's some fun things you can do. Like, I correlate everything that we do back to our core values in this organization and our mission. And I share stories around how that influences our care, how it provides these great outcomes, and how we as individuals need to embody our core values in order for this organization to be successful. And we have a positive culture because our core values resonate to positivity, to compassion, to community. We call them the 5 C's. And those things are so important. When I have a bad day, I don't get the luxury of shouting that out down the hallway. I have to take pause. I have to reflect. I have to think about our core values. And so anytime I'm going out of my office, I'm representing the culture of our organization and what we need to be and how we need to act.
So we have compassion. I want those 5 C's.
I can't be giving our trade secrets out. No. Yeah, so we have compassion, we have community, we have commitment, we have collaboration, and we have caring.
Excellent. Now, I really want to hit compassion and caring. And I want to tie that to something we had on the pre-call about how important it is to onboard people correctly. Because so many times I've seen in healthcare, since that's where I spend most of my time, because Jane is hyper smart, she's, has a medical degree or an advanced degree. We don't read, we really don't need to spend a lot of time helping Jane come up to speed. She's smart, she's worked at other organizations. We'll just drop her at her desk and say, go for it. And shaking your head. How do you, I can see onboarding somebody, Carl's just out of college, first job. But why the onboarding with someone who already has maybe a couple of decades of career experience? Why?
Well, there's a couple things here. When you're looking at onboarding, I am a component of a very well structured onboarding processes because there's just some things that can be uniform that you need to get out of the way to make sure that you're following the appropriate hiring and onboarding process, right? But then there's some other aspects of, and we've experienced this. We've been the organization that's like, oh, Jane is great. She's been a doctor for this many years. Let her see patients, but you're skipping some really big steps by doing that. Jane doesn't know your culture. Jane doesn't know your policies. Jane doesn't know your protocols. Jane doesn't even know the team. So you need to take time with building trust with that person and the onboarding process. What that doesn't mean is that you can't have a fast track for Jane because she may pick up on things more quickly, but I wouldn't skip any of the steps for training this individual. And so for our organization, the first week of someone being employed with our organization is the same for everyone. We need to give them the onboard and training of who we are, where we've been, what we've accomplished, some of the difficulties that we're experiencing. We educate them on the market. We educate them on our culture. We talk about the 5 C's, how they're important, how they're ingrained. They meet with our top senior leadership and most of our managing partners within our organization because they need to know these people. They need to know who they are. They need a face to a name. And we can do that right now with our size, but that's something I never want to lose. And I get to set with them when they're coming out of their training orientation and have a really candid conversation with them as a group and say, we talk about compassion and accountability and how important that is, not only to me, but the organization. And then I say something at the end of every single onboarding, and that's we are in the area of helping develop people. And we hope that you become a better person than when you signed your employment offer. And if that means that you're transitioning out of this organization to go do something that you feel is better, that is okay.
And that ties exactly to my next question that I want you to comment on because I wrote down so much in our pre-call here, James. We are not in the business of holding on to people. You referred to that with this woman you let go, who actually just 2 months ago said, "Thank you for letting me go." But we talk so much about retention, and here you're talking about in your first week with them, if you find there's a better place that you're going to enjoy more, that's we almost to the state we've done our job. So
Yeah.
how did you arrive at that? Because that's contrological.
Yeah, I this company is not in the art of hanging on to people. It's not what we do. And when I talk to my direct reports, my senior leadership team, and when we're onboarding them and even in professional development plans, I'm like, I want you to be so great that everyone else wants you. And then I want you to choose to stay here because that is culture. That is greatness. And I want you to be better than me. I want you to be smarter than me because that's how you grow talent. And I will tell you, my senior leadership team can far outperform me any day. You could remove me from this business and they're going to do great. And one of them is going to rise to the occasion. And so when we say we're not hanging on to people, I think some people might think it's counterintuitive. They're immediately going to go to retention, but you can retain to a fault. Re, Longevity is not always a great thing. If someone justifies their value by saying, I've been here 23 years. Okay, that's great. Let's talk about some of the things you've achieved in that 23 years. Let's talk about how the organization has grown in those 23 years. Let's talk about impact. It's a great thing, but there's many other conversations need to happen. So if someone is choosing to leave, I'm not going to beg them to stay. I'm going to ask them, what got you to this point that now you feel like you need to leave? And from that question is going to decide whether we counter offer what's happening or whether we say, thank you so much for your time in our organization. We hope you go to do great things.
Marvelous. We talked about who are the number one stakeholders, and I love that conversation. Talk to me about that.
There's so many stakeholders in our business. But there's there's a statement that I say in our organization, and for us, many times when I started on this journey, they would say, "We're here to care for patients. We're here to care for patients," and that is what we do. But my job as a CEO is to care for my staff. They're my stakeholders. My employees are the most important thing to me. You hear all the time that customers come first, but in this business, customers come second. Because if I don't have the employees to provide the skill set and the medical care that needs to be done, or the administrative processes, I'm not even going to be able to have the opportunity to care for that patient or take care of that customer. And so I would encourage and challenge any leader that says the customer comes first, because as a leader, my customer is my employees.
Excellent. One last question that we went over. You talked about custom training always pays off. Now you've talked about the 80% of skill building, the 10 per I 70 70% skill building, 20 10% outside. I'm messing up the numbers. But talk to me about your custom training.
So I think it's really important to customize training with developing your staff, because we're all going to come with different talents and different, even different just careers. And sometimes we just go into this, go to your job, and if you need training, get some training, or we're going to train you on this platform. But really customizing your training and development to the person, and that can mean so many different things. But when you take the person into consideration and customize what they need to gain their skill sets, their performance is going to ideally skyrocket and improve. The way that they feel about you, the way they feel about work is going to change, and you're going to start to shift and make shift everything towards a positive light. And as a new CEO, when I was negotiating this position, the board of directors really asked me what my passion was, what I was looking for, and they invested in a custom training. I said, to be successful, I have to let you know some of my weaknesses. I've never been a CEO before. So when I Googled CEO statistics, and I found out that a very large percent of CEOs fell in their first 12 months, I was like, I don't know if I need to do this. Uh, so I need a CEO trainer to walk with me in this first year. Or if you're not willing to invest in that, invest in me, then this isn't for me, because I want to make sure that I'm successful. And they did that. It was the best thing that's ever happened to me in my career, because that former CEO taught me culture. She taught me operations. She taught me how to think about things differently. And I don't know that that's something that other companies would have done without the suggestion. And so when we're onboarding new people, or when I see a leader struggling or someone within our department, we think about how we can customize training to their skill sets and how they receive information, not go read this educational resource and fix it.
So, in conclusion, one last question, I promise. You mentioned imposter syndrome.
Mhm.
And so just imagine joining us on the call is a brand new physician leader, a brand who has no training in leadership other than
Mhm.
a medical degree, or a nurse manager who again has her MSN, has been bedside for 2 to 3 years, really high potential individual, and now is perhaps an assistant nurse manager over a huge labor and delivery unit with over 200 nurses in it. Real story. What would you tell them as they think, I am so far over my head? People don't like me. People are looking at me as if I'm a rookie, which, by the way, I am.
Yeah.
What counsel should you give to them having walked that path yourself?
Definitely been there, and there's still days that I have that imposter syndrome kind of creep back in. First and most importantly, tell yourself every single day, you were selected for this position. You have the talent. Someone saw the potential or saw what was happening in you, and you got this position. You landed this position. It was not given to you. You earned it. And so that immediately starts to take away that thinking of I'm imposter syndrome is also I'm not good enough, right? It's a confidence thing. It's a afraid of failure potential. But you got to this point. So sit up straight and understand that it's going to take time for you to prove to your team that you're the leader that was hired. You're going to make mistakes. Best thing about leadership is you get to make mistakes as long as you acknowledge the mistakes that you've made and you do better. And you just need to sit back and understand that there's in you. This company is investing in you, and you are what they hired. Um, Imposter syndrome, I've sat through many symposiums on it, and I think we all experience it at different facets. Now, even when I walk into a business meeting, I'm thinking about how young are they going to think I am? And I used to spend the first 10 minutes in every single business meeting justifying to the people in front of me that I deserve to be in the seat that I was in. I don't do that anymore. I go in and I follow the agenda and I start speaking the way that I know that I can speak because I'm in this position. I'm the chief executive officer for Mirasol Health, and no one in that room can take it away from me as long as I'm doing my job to the best of my ability.
Marvelous. James, this has been a really fast hour, and I really appreciate you with us today and just teaching our listeners. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.